In this video, I am going to show you how you can make selections inside of Photoshop. Now, this is something that you will commonly be doing because selections are a very important part of taking a piece of the photograph or design that you're working on and manipulating it. So when you make a selection, you're defining an area that you want to edit. And the edit can be anything. It can be moving it around, making it bigger, smaller, rotating it, changing the color, adding effect. There's all kinds of things that you can do with selections. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now. Over in the toolbar, you can see that we have a couple selection tools, such as the rectangular marquee tool, the lasso tools, and then the quick selection and the magic wand tools. There's also a select option at the top, and if we click on that, you can see that we have a bunch of different selection options. Now, we won't go over all of these now because there's more ways to select, such as using select and mask and quick mask mode and some other things, but we'll look at some of the basics. So first of all, if we want to edit everything on our workspace, we can just hit the all button, the select all button. So I'm going to press that. And whenever I do, you can see that these little marching ants, as we call them, are going around this document. This is called a marquee selection, a marquee or marching ants. And basically it's just showing the boundaries of what we've selected and what we want to manipulate. So if I select the move tool in the tools bar, I can go ahead and take this and move this document around based on the selection that we've made. I'm going to hit Control Z or Command Z to undo that. If we want to deselect anything or deselect everything, we can go to the top and we can hit Select and we can pick Deselect, and that will unselect everything for us. So nothing is selected now. So if you go over into the Tools panel or Tools bar and you pick this first option, if we hold down, you can see there's multiple ones here: rectangular marquee tool, elliptical, single row, single column. Let's just pick the rectangular marquee tool. Now we have this crosshairs or this target icon, and if I click and drag, you can see the selection that will be made. So maybe I just want to select this little piece of wood here, and when I let go, it gives us that marquee selection or those marching ants again. Now I can do what I did before. I can go to the move tool and I can hover over that. You can see now I have a cursor with some scissors, and that means that I can click, hold down, and move that selection. And as long as I don't deselect, it'll stay selected, and I can keep moving that around the document wherever I would like. So you can see how you could use this to manipulate the document. I'm going to undo those. And if we go back to the top, we can go to deselect, and that will unselect it. But if we want that back, I can undo that deselect command and it'll bring it back for us. So that just means I deselected, but I didn't mean to do that. That was a mistake. I still want it selected, so I can go to edit, or I can hit Control Z or Command Z and undo the deselect. Let's say that I make this selection, but this isn't what I want to manipulate. I want to manipulate everything but this. I can go to the top and hit select and go to inverse. And when I do that, even though it looks similar, what's actually happening is that the whole document's being selected, and then it's created this bounding box here that says select everything except this area. So if I hover over this area, my cursor is the normal cursor with the compass. But if I hover over the other part, the inverse of that selection, now I have my scissors. And if I click and hold, you can see that I'm selecting the inverse or the opposite of this document. So let's go ahead and undo that. You can go to Edit, Undo Move, or hit Control or Command Z to undo that. And let's say we want to unselect or deselect this. We can go to the top and go to Deselect. So these are pretty common shortcuts you might want to memorize. Control or Command A for Select All, or Control or Command D for Deselect. You'll use those quite a bit. So I'll go ahead and deselect. If we go under the marquee tools, you can see that we have an elliptical marquee tool, so that's going to give us a rounded selection. And based on how I drag this, you can see how it'll scale. Now you can try to get a perfect circle, but sometimes you don't always get that correctly. So if you hold down the Shift key, it'll actually constrain the proportions of that circle and give you a perfect circle selection. So I can let go, I can go grab my move tool, and now I can move around that perfect circle. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to deselect. Let's pick that circle again and see if we can get this Canon circle. So this little lens here, if I can try to click and line it up, and I can get pretty close. Now I've practiced this quite a bit, so it'll take a little practice to do that. Or I can try to click and hold shift down and it'll make a perfect circle, but you can see I'm off here. This isn't perfect. I'm going to undo that. Something else you can do is you can click and drag, and if you hold down the Alt or Option key, it actually turns the center of the circle where you've made your selection instead of a corner. So let me show you that again. I'm going to deselect. If I click over here and drag in this top left to right corner, you can see that my starting point is here and the circle gets bigger. If I deselect and I click that same spot and I hit Alt or Option, instead of going outwards, it actually makes that the center. And that's a little easier to work with sometimes. So if I hold Alt or Option and I hold down the Shift key, it'll constrain and make a circle from the center. That's a lot more of what we want for this Canon lens. So I'm going to hit Control or Command D to deselect. I'm going to go to where I think the center of this Canon lens is. I'm going to click to select, and you can see that's not what we want. So we'll hit Alt or Option, and now it's constraining it from the center. And if I hold Shift, I can actually try to get that a little better. Now it's a little too high, so I might go down just a little bit and try to get that right there. And that's by holding the Shift and the Alt or Option key at the same time. It'll go from the center and it'll constrain it to a circle. Now I can grab my move tool and then I can move this around. I can undo that. I can also copy and paste copies of these and make more of them. So something you can do with selection tools, if you go to Edit and you go down to Copy, I've made a copy of that now, and if I go to Edit and I hit Paste, it'll actually paste another one. Now you don't see it right now, but with the move tool selected, it just pasted it right in place. If I move that, you can see I've made a selection, I've copied that selection, and I moved it to a different, or I pasted it and moved it to a different place. So now I can make multiple copies. I'm going to hit Control or Command Z to, I'm going to hit twice to undo those. I'm going to hit Control or Command D to deselect. And you have the same options for the rectangular marquee tool. So I can hit Shift and it will constrain it to a square. And if I hit Alt, it will constrain it from the center instead of the corner. So this is the corner with Alt or Option. If I hit down Alt or Option, it will actually constrain it from the center. And I'm holding Shift to get that perfect square. If I let go of Shift, I can constrain it from the center, holding Alt or Option, and then get like a nice rectangle. I'm going to hit Control or Command D to deselect. Below that, we have some lasso tools. So we have the regular lasso tool, and if we select that, you can see the icon changes. And what this does is it gives us the ability to do a freeform selection. Now, if I let go, it'll automatically fill in from the first point to the last point. So I'm going to let go, and you can see it created a line between the first and last points, but it gives me a freehand selection. So now I can go to my move tool and move that out. That's the lasso tool, gives us a freehand selection. If we go to the polygonal lasso tool, it'll allow us to define points. So these are, if you want some hard edges, you just click multiple times and it'll give you these hard lines to make these sharp points. Now, if you go to the first point and the last point, you connect them, you can see the cursor changes to a circle. And if I click, it actually fills in and completes that selection. So this is really great if I want to select maybe something particular like this keyboard and I know it's a square. I can click in the corner and go down, and I'm doing this fast, so I'm obviously missing it a little bit, but I can finish that. And then I can select that keyboard and I can move that out of there. So that's the polygonal lasso tool. And then there's a magnetic lasso tool. We're not going to get into that one right now, but basically it works by finding differences in pixel information, and it will try to find the edges of a selection. So if I just roll around this corner, it helps me select based on pixel information, but it's better if you change some options. I don't want to get too detailed into that right now. Below that, we have the quick selection tool and the magic wand tool, and these are really awesome. These are for making nice, easy selections. They work kind of the same, but they work in different ways. I'm not going to get too much into the differences of them right now, but I'll show you how they work. So the quick selection tool, if we select that first one, it actually gives us a brush, and we can change it with our brush settings. And if we click in an area, this works really great when you have high contrast areas like the white against the wood background, or the dark Canon lens against the wood background, or this blue versus the yellows and greens and reds. But if we click and we drag in this area, you can see I've only dragged a little bit, but it found the differences for us and quickly made that selection. So now I can easily grab that and move that around. So we'll deselect, and we can do, like, let's say we can do this keyboard, and it's finding the edges of the silver versus the wood background, and we got to be a little careful because we could actually click outside of the area, and that's not what we want. We'll keep selecting. And now we've quickly selected the keyboard without having to get real fine-tuned, and it did a better job than me using, say, the polygonal lasso tool, because it found that corner and everything for us. However, we went over here and we didn't mean to do that. You can see right now that we have a plus sign. So wherever I select, it's going to add to the selection. So if I select the mouse now, it's actually added both of those. I can demonstrate this by grabbing the move tool, and you can see that both have been selected. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to undo the mouse. I'm going to go back and pick my quick selection tool. Now we have the plus sign, but if you hold Alt or Option, it'll change it to a minus sign, and this will get rid of some of the selection. And that's what we want to do here. We want to erase some of the selection. So I can come in here, and by holding Alt or Option, I can remove some of that we don't want selected. If I overdo it, I can let go. It goes back to my plus sign, and I can add it back in. So if I wanted to maybe get rid of these keys, I could come in here and try to remove them. Now it's not doing it perfectly, but you can see by holding the Alt or Option, it's subtracting from that selection. If I grab the move tool and I move that out of the way, you can see those keys have stayed because I deselected them, and there's a hole in the keyboard now. So we'll undo that, and we'll deselect, and we'll go to the magic wand. The magic wand tool works similar in a way where it's going to try to guess the information, but it's based on pixel sample sizes. And so it's a little trickier to get right. However, this tool works really great in some other instances. I always start with a quick selection tool, and if I can't get it, I'll go to the magic wand. But here I can select and just click one time, and it'll find the differences in the area. So instead of dragging around, it's going to try to find similar pixel information. And the higher the contrast of values, the easier this works. So we have a bright white versus this wood background, so it went pretty easily. If we click in the blue area, you can see that it selected all the blues, but it found differences in these blues, and so it hasn't selected those. Now we want to select them, but if we just click, it's actually going to reselect an area. But that's not what we want. We want to add these to it. So we're going to click, and then this time we're going to hold the Shift key down, and you can see it adds a plus sign, and that is like adding, like you did with the click selection tool. So now I just got to click a bunch of times inside of here to select these different letters. Now this would be easier if I actually zoomed in, panned up. I can hold down Shift, add to the selection, and get my selections a little better here. But as you can see, sometimes it's not as great as the quick selection tool because you might miss some pixels. I can see little pixels here that are being missed, and I'm having to click on them to add them in. And then we have it selected. So I'm going to zoom out. And then now we have the whole thing selected there. So I can hold Shift Well, let me go back to the magic wand. I can hold shift and add in selections, and based on the color, so this bright white, there's a little gray at the bottom. It didn't select everything, so I just got to click again to add those in while holding shift. If I want to deselect, it's the same thing as before. I hit Alt or Option and I can deselect. So now when I move, you can see we just have those two because I deselected the selection on the mouse. This tool, you do have to be a little careful because it's using a sample size, and you can make that sample size tolerance bigger or smaller. So I'm going to deselect, and if we make it a really small tolerance instead of 32 and we click in the blue, you can see it's even selecting less. So it's a much more lower tolerance for the pixel information that's trying to find, so we would need to add in a lot more. If we deselect that and we pick a higher tolerance, let's say 80, and we click in there, now it picks the whole thing because it's finding these blues the same as these darker blues and selecting that for us. This can be a problem sometimes though when you're working with some things like shadows or similar colors. So if I'm over here picking these pins and I select the pin but I have a high tolerance, it actually found some of the wood grain to be similar to that pixel information, and so it selected some of that, and that's not what we want. So you would need to lower that tolerance down to say 30, and then when you select, you get just that pin and not all that extra wood grain, but you have to go in and edit, keep adding to the selection. So it's a little trickier to use. Sometimes it works great depending on what you're working on, but I usually start with the quick selection tool, and it works like a brush. I can actually, if I need it to be smaller, I can turn down the brush size, and then I can come in here and very quickly pick those pins. And if I can't get it right, see I went over there, it added that in, then maybe I use a different selection tool such as the lasso tools, the rectangular marquee, or any of those other selection tools. But that is the basics of how you select inside of Photoshop, and you'll see that being used a lot and something you want to get comfortable with. So go ahead and pull up some images of your own, or use this image if you would like, and try selecting in different ways using the marquee tools, the lasso tools, the quick selection tools, and then also make sure you go up to the select options and practice those also, because it will help you out on your journey as you begin learning more Photoshop.